I went camping last September with my cousin Shane, something we'd done together since we were kids. We grew up in Montana, surrounded by mountains, so camping was never a big event to us. It was normal, almost routine. But this trip was different from the moment we arrived. We chose a lesser-known area deep in the Kootenai National Forest, the type of place you only find if someone local tells you about it. There are no signs, no marked trails, no designated fire pits. Just a faint dirt path and a clearing large enough for a tent. We left our car around 5 p.m. and hiked about 30 minutes into the forest before deciding on a spot. The first thing I noticed was how unnervingly quiet the place was. Forests usually have some kind of soundtrack: birds, insects, the wind in the branches. But here, it felt like everything was holding its breath. Even Shane, who loves the outdoors more than anyone I know, said, "Feels dead out here." We brushed it off and set up camp, trying to shake the weird feeling. We made a small fire, cooked, and talked. As the sun went down, the forest got even quieter. I kept glancing around, waiting for the usual forest noises to kick in, but nothing came. It was the kind of silence where you could hear your heartbeat if you stood still long enough. By around 11 p.m., the fire had burned down, and we climbed into the tent. I fell asleep faster than I expected. But around 1 in the morning, I woke up instantly, like someone had flipped a switch in my brain. No groggy blinking, no confusion. Just awake. At first, I didn't know why. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps pacing around our tent. At first, I thought it was an animal. Maybe a deer or elk. But after a few seconds, I realized that wasn't right. Animals don't move that slowly or deliberately. These steps had weight. Intention. Like whoever, or whatever, was walking was circling us on purpose. I didn't say anything yet. I just listened, trying to make sense of it. The footsteps went from the back of the tent to the side, then stopped. I held my breath, waiting. After maybe 10 seconds, they started again. One step, pause, another step, pause. That's when I whispered Shane. He woke up immediately like he'd already been halfway there. "You hear it?" I whispered. "Yeah," he said quietly. We stayed silent for a few seconds, listening as it continued its slow circle. The ground was covered in pine needles, but whatever was walking around us was heavy enough to make the soil crunch underneath. It was too slow for a bear. Bears don't creep. And it didn't have the four-footed rhythm of an animal. These were human steps. Shane reached into his pack and pulled out his hunting knife. He didn't unzip anything. He'd slept with it beside him. The footsteps began to slow even more. They stopped at the head of the tent, right next to where I was lying. I could hear breathing now. Slow, steady, almost measured. Like someone standing there, inches from me, just listening. I felt the hair on the back of my neck lift. I didn't dare move. Shane placed his hand on my arm, telling me to stay still. Then it happened. A hand pressed against the side of the tent. I froze. It was right next to my face, just a thin nylon separating us. I could see the shape through the fabric. A palm, 5 long fingers. A human hand. Not a paw, not a hoof. A hand. It didn't push or grab. It just rested there gently, almost like it was feeling the tent. Feeling for us. Then the hand began to slide. Slowly, deliberately, dragging across the tent wall, tracing the shape of my head as it moved. I stopped breathing entirely. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. The hand slid for maybe 2 feet before lifting away. Shane mouthed, "Don't move." We didn't say a word for the next hour. I'm not exaggerating, an entire hour. The footsteps continued circling the tent at a slow, unnatural pace. Every few minutes, it would stop. We'd wait, thinking maybe it was gone. And then it would start again. Sometimes closer, sometimes further. Once, it sounded like it knelt down because I heard the breathing again from the bottom edge of the tent, low and close. Whatever it was didn't sound like it was trying to get in. It felt like it was trying to listen. Around 4:30 or so, the sky started to lighten just faintly, the way it does before sunrise when everything turns a dull shade of gray. And just like that, the footsteps wandered off. Not fast, not running. Just a calm walk into the trees, fading slowly until we couldn't hear them at all. We didn't talk for maybe 10 minutes. We just lay there, listening, making sure we weren't imagining the silence. Finally, Shane whispered, we're leaving. We packed up in complete silence. I kept expecting at any moment to hear the footsteps coming back, but the forest remained dead quiet. When everything was packed, I walked around the tent area, partly to reassure myself that the thing had actually been real. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Bare human footprints. I'm not kidding. They were huge. At least a size 15 or 16, maybe bigger. The prints were deep, much deeper than ours, like the person weighed twice as much as a normal man. I crouched and touched one. The soil was still slightly sunken in the center, meaning it hadn't been long since the last step was taken. The footprints circled the tent over and over. I counted at least 5 full loops, maybe more. Some steps were only a foot from the tent wall. I called Shane over. He stared at them, then said, "Let's go." Now, we didn't eat, didn't rest, didn't talk. We just walked straight back to the car. The whole time, I kept feeling like something was following us from a distance. I didn't hear anything, but the feeling was so strong it made my skin crawl. When we finally got to the car and shut the doors, both of us just sat there for a minute, breathing shakily. Shane turned the engine on, and we drove out of there without looking back. To this day, Shane refuses to talk about that night, and I don't blame him. Something was walking around our tent. Something with bare feet. Something impossibly heavy. Something with human hands. And it was studying us. We never went back. I've always been the type of person who enjoys camping alone. Most people think being alone in the woods is creepy, but I've always found it peaceful. No noise, no distractions, no people. Just trees, fire, and silence. But after what happened 2 summers ago, I haven't camped alone again, not once. I live in Idaho, and there's a huge stretch of forest near Priest Lake that I've explored for years. One small area, a little off the trail, has these old, barely visible campsites that look like they were made decades ago. No benches, no fire rings, just small clearings in the trees. One Friday afternoon, I decided I needed a break from everything. I packed my truck and headed straight for that area. When I arrived, I noticed something strange. One of the old campsites, one I'd never used before, had signs that someone had recently been there. A rope tied between 2 trees, a pile of firewood, and a dark green tent sitting right in the middle of the clearing. I figured someone had beaten me to it. So I went another 200 yards down the trail and set up my own camp. I didn't think much of it at the time. It wasn't unusual to see other campers out there. But by sunset, I noticed something odd. I never saw the person who owned that tent. No movement, no voice, no fire, no flashlight, just a silent tent in the middle of the woods. When it got dark, I cooked dinner and kept an eye on the clearing through the trees. Around 10 p.m., a light finally flickered on inside the tent. But instead of staying steady like a lantern or flashlight, it kept fading. Bright dim, like someone was walking back and forth in front of the light source. At one point, the silhouette of a person appeared, just the outline of a tall figure, standing still. Not moving at all, just standing, facing my direction. Even from far away, something about the stillness made every hair on my body rise. I stopped watching and tried to shake it off. People do weird things while camping. Maybe he was stretching or organizing stuff. By midnight, I was in my sleeping bag. I'm a light sleeper, so even in the woods I hear everything. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly, not from a noise, but from the feeling that something was very wrong. My fire was out. The forest was silent. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps. Walking toward my tent. My heart started pounding instantly. I sat up quietly and listened. The steps were coming from the direction of the other campsite, the one with the green tent. I grabbed the small hatchet I keep next to my sleeping bag and pulled my flashlight into my lap. The footsteps got closer until I was sure whoever it was just outside my tent. I held my breath. Then nothing. No movement. No breathing. Just silence. I waited. 30 seconds felt like 10 minutes. Finally, I leaned forward and zipped the tent door down just an inch. My plan was to flash the light through the tiny gap, just enough to scare off a bear or let a person know I was awake. But before I could even move the zipper, something touched the tent. A finger. A slow drag of a fingertip down the front of the tent door. From the top, all the way, to the bottom. My entire body went cold. I whispered, barely speaking out loud. "Who's there?" No answer. I felt the shape of the fingertip move again, this time tracing a slow circle into the fabric of the tent. Round and round, soft, deliberate motions, like someone was drawing on my tent. That was enough for me. I grabbed the zipper and yanked it down fast while raising the flashlight. The beam shot into the clearing, but no one was there. Just trees, fog rising off the forest floor, and my own breath shaking in the air. But the footsteps earlier were real, and the finger on the tent was real. I stepped out with the flashlight pointed forward, scanning around the campsite. Then I saw something that made my stomach twist. Footprints. Bare footprints. Huge ones, leading from the direction of the other campsite, straight to mine. I followed the prints with my light, and froze when I saw where they ended. Right behind my tent, less than 2 feet from where I had been sleeping. I backed up slowly and turned toward the other campsite. That weird, flickering light inside the tent was still glowing faintly. But now the silhouette was gone. Instead, the tent was completely still. No movement, no sound, just a faint, dying light coming from inside. I didn't go back to sleep. I sat with my back against a tree, axe in hand, flashlight shaking slightly in my fingers. Around 4 a.m., the light in the distant tent finally went completely dark. No fade out, just a hard, sudden click of darkness. And then I heard something. Not footsteps, not a voice, but metal. The sound of a zipper, a tent zipper, far away, in the dark. I turned my flashlight and aimed it at the other campsite, but I couldn't see anything from where I was. I waited, listening. Nothing. At sunrise, I packed immediately, even though I barely had the energy to stand. I decided to walk past the other campsite on my way back, just to make sure whoever was there was okay, or to at least confirm they existed. But when I reached the clearing, my stomach dropped. The tent was gone. Not collapsed. Not moved. Gone. No footprints. No ashes. No gear. Not even the rope tied between the trees. It was like the campsite had never existed in the first place. The only thing left was one perfect footprint in the dirt, large, bare, and deep, like someone impossibly heavy had stood there the night before. I left the forest without looking back once, and I never camped alone again. I've been camping in the Rockies for almost a decade, usually solo. It's my escape from the chaos of the city, my way of resetting. I thought I knew what alone felt like out there, but last summer I learned just how wrong I was. I had planned a 3-day solo trip in the Sawtooth Mountains, somewhere far off the beaten trail. No cell service, no GPS. Just me, my gear, and the forest. I arrived mid-afternoon, carrying everything on my back since the last few miles of the trail were impassable by truck. The clearing I found looked perfect. Flat ground, fire pit already carved into the soil, and a small creek nearby. I set up my tent, stacked firewood, and prepared a simple meal before the sun began to dip behind the jagged peaks. The first night was uneventful, aside from the usual animal noises, owls, coyotes, and the rustle of squirrels. I fell asleep listening to the creek, feeling peaceful. But sometime in the early hours, I woke up to something strange. It wasn't a noise I recognized, more like a series of soft, distant whispers. I froze, trying to convince myself it was the wind moving through the pine needles. But then I realized they were words. Clear human words. I couldn't make out what was being said, but it was deliberate. I stayed still, trying to hear more. The whispers were coming from the direction of the creek, a few dozen feet from my tent. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the sound. Nothing. No movement. No shadows. Nothing but the swaying trees. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was probably some late-night hikers, or maybe a ranger checking the trails. I shrugged it off and went back to sleep, keeping my flashlight close. Morning brought daylight and some reassurance. I went for a short hike along the creek, looking for signs of anyone else being there. I found nothing. No footprints, no litter, no tents. It was as though I had the entire forest to myself. That night, I built a fire closer to my tent, determined to feel secure. I thought if there were other people nearby, the fire would keep them away. Around 2 a.m., I woke again. The whispers were back, louder this time. I could swear I heard my name. James, faint, drawn out, almost like a warning. I froze. My flashlight was just within reach. I sat up slowly, trying to see where the sound was coming from, but the beam of light didn't reach far enough. Then movement. Shadows shifting between the trees, darting from one trunk to another. Not like an animal. Too deliberate, too human. My breathing became heavy, my hands shaking. I grabbed my hiking knife and quietly unzipped the tent. Outside, the air was cold, the fire embers glowing weakly. I stepped out cautiously, scanning the perimeter. Nothing. Just the trees. The whispers stopped. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, exhaustion playing tricks on me. I went back into the tent, but sleep didn't come. I stayed awake until dawn, listening to every creak and crack of the forest. When sunlight finally touched the treetops, I felt slightly better, though an underlying tension remained. The next night, I was more prepared. I reinforced the tent, kept the fire closer, and carried my flashlight and knife at all times. Around 1 a.m., the whispers returned. This time, they were clearer, forming short phrases. "Don't leave, stay." I felt frozen, a cold sweat running down my back. I couldn't see anything, but I knew I wasn't alone. Something or someone was watching me. Then I saw it, a figure at the edge of the firelight. Not fully visible, mostly shadowed, but tall, thin, and unnaturally still. I pointed the flashlight, but it vanished the moment the beam hit it. My heart felt like it would burst. I shouted, demanding the figure show itself, but there was only silence afterward. The whispers were gone. I spent the rest of the night on edge, sitting next to the fire, every sound magnified. When dawn came, I saw something terrifying. The area around my tent was disturbed. Pine needles had been trampled, and faint footprints circled the tent in a pattern that didn't make sense. Too small for a human, but too deep for an animal. My firewood had been moved slightly, almost as if someone had been there while I slept. I decided I wasn't staying another night. I packed quickly, my hands shaking, glancing over my shoulder constantly. As I hiked back to the trailhead, I kept seeing glimpses of movement between the trees. No figures, just shadows that seemed to follow me. Back in my truck, I exhaled and tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe exhaustion. But when I got home and unloaded my gear, I noticed something chilling, a single pine cone tied with a thin string placed neatly on top of my backpack. I hadn't touched it. It hadn't been there before. I've gone back to the Rockies since, but never that trail. And I make sure to never hike alone at night. I still hear whispers sometimes, especially in quiet moments. And every time the wind moves through the pines, I can't help but feel they're calling my name again.